program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Eau Claire School Board. Before asking you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, I would like to ask that we honor the lives of the 3 elementary school students, Girl Scouts, and one adult woman from the Chippewa Falls School District who were tragically killed over the weekend in a hit and run. There is also one child that remains in critical condition tonight. The entire community has been devastated by this sudden, tragic, and unnecessary loss. On behalf of the Eau Claire Area School District, I extend our thoughts and prayers to be with the grieving families, teachers, classmates, and loved ones. Please join me for a moment of silence to honor the precious lives lost. Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I want to also thank all of our teachers and students and board members and so many who wore green today. There was a sea of green across our district, and that was a powerful show of solidarity because we're all one Chippewa Valley and we are all grieving together. So, Secretary Iverson, are we in compliance with the open meetings law notification?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Could we have a roll call, please, for verification of quorum?
Commissioner Bika?
Here.
Commissioner Hambuck-Boyle?
Here.
Commissioner Harder is absent. Commissioner Klinkhammer is absent. Commissioner Luganbill?
Here.
Commissioner Torres is also absent, and Commissioner Vu.
Here.
Okay, so as a point of information for everyone tonight, we do have a quorum for the purposes of board business, but we lack a 2/3 quorum, which means that we are not able to vote on items that require a 2/3 majority, so that basically the only thing that we're going to have to modify tonight is, you'll see later on in the consent agenda, we simply will not entertain 7.6 through 7.8, and we'll place those automatically on the following agenda. So this takes us now to the public forum. You have up to 4 minutes to speak. When you come up to the podium, just make sure that the microphone has a red light, and there will be a timer to keep track of your time. The first speaker is Ben Holman.
Ben Holman, 1727 West Mead Street. Hello, board members and staff. Thank you for your service to our community. I'd like to talk about 4K programs in our district tonight. The demo trends proposals have all started with the assumption that we're facing increasing enrollment in our 4K programs, and I can't find public information to support that claim. The administration is proposing closing Roosevelt because the space is needed for 4K, but no evidence has been presented to support that assumption. Furthermore, no information has been presented demonstrating why Roosevelt makes the best site for that 4K expansion. This is quite different than the presentations we've seen about the elementary space needs around our district, where a lot of information was shown supporting that argument. Our community needs more information about our 4K and Head Start programs, and when you come to our community with listening sessions and with a referendum down the line, we will need to know what's happening with 4K and how it affects Roosevelt. The second thing I'd like to talk about are the 2 proposals that you have received from Demo Trends. The cheaper option of closing Roosevelt looks very attractive against the very expensive option of creating an entirely new Roosevelt and creating an entirely new 4K program. And I think there's a reasonable third option to consider. I think that we could keep Roosevelt as a neighborhood school due to the deferred maintenance that would cost $2 to $3 million. That's deferred maintenance that was pushed off due to the 2016 referendum choices. We could continue to manage our enrollment by using flexible boundaries, which has been working well so far. And we can find a creative solution for these 4K needs that we need more information about at some of the other district properties. For example, the elementary schools that have been identified, Longfellow and Locust Lane, and then Little Red has not really been publicly discussed as an option for 4K. So as you come up to the listening sessions, sure I'm not the only person considering this sort of solution, and I would love it if you would give it a good long consideration and come to those listening sessions with more than 2 drastic options, but consider this third approach and other similar approaches. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Margot Daling.
Hi, I'm Margot Daling, 3118 County Farm Road. As a scientist, facts and figures are part of my professional life. However, the data that I review means nothing without context. During the October 8th school board meeting, Mr. Lyons stated that Roosevelt has part-time staff members in counseling in other areas, implying that the students at Roosevelt had unequal access to district resources. My family's experience at Roosevelt has been the opposite of what Demo and Trends data has suggested. We moved from the Putnam Heights area to Roosevelt late summer of 2017. While we were nervous about sending our son to Roosevelt, our neighbors assured us that Roosevelt was a great school, and so we decided to go forth with that. Our son had some behavior issues in kindergarten at Putnam, and through scheduling meetings, the full-time counselor was unable to attend any of these meetings with the teacher. At Roosevelt, however, it was the exact opposite. My son started his first grade year with the same behavior issues. We held meetings with his teachers, the school counselor, and Principal Dahlman, and we worked through these issues together. I'm very happy to report that my son has been successful in his second grade year so far. The fact remains that the number of students that dictates the staffing of counselors and MAPE staff is not the success or the accessibility of Roosevelt. The same staffing situation occurs at other Eau Claire schools and is not unique to Roosevelt. To use staffing to suggest students at Roosevelt are at a disadvantage is simply untrue. I urge the members of the school board to look beyond the crumbling exterior of a building in need of great repair, to see a team of staff that has not lost its purpose, educating and nurturing students, providing them with the tools they need to build a successful life. In this time of budget shortfalls and record growth in the Eau Claire area, it is crucial to look at community schools like Roosevelt. The school has truly engaged the neighborhoods to fill the gaps that the district has been unable to. Please use Roosevelt as the model school it has become, persevering through physical building disadvantages to achieve its goal, educating children. Like I said, I'm not an educator. I'm a scientist guided by facts and figures. However, I do recognize that sometimes you need to interpret the facts and figures with context. There is something special at Roosevelt, something special happening at Roosevelt, and the school board should take note. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Lindsay Brandrup.
All right, that's working? All right, thank you. I'm Lindsay Brandrup, 1521 Quarry Street in Eau Claire. And I am here tonight, thank you, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to talk and for letting this one come along. I'm here tonight as a...
We're very baby and child friendly here.
Yeah. I'm here tonight as a parent of a student in kindergarten, but also as an educator. I teach English at Memorial High School, and I want to start by saying that I understand, maybe not through personal experience, but I've been attending board meetings relatively regularly the last few months, and just kind of learning about the scope of what you all are deciding upon all the time, and it's big. I've not really ever had experience looking at, is this system operating as one or anything like that. So in that way, it's been really eye-opening. So I'm really here tonight, I know, just speaking of like one fraction of what you do, but that is as a voice for educators. I'm not any sort of elected representative, but I can say that I'm a representative of many voices, a significant number of voices, not just at Memorial High School, but throughout the district.
And this is my 12th year teaching, my 10th year in the district. And I guess the last couple years, there's really an issue with teacher morale. And it's not an issue, I want to make sure that it's not interpreted as teachers complaining or teachers aren't happy with certain things. I know there's bound to be teachers that aren't happy with decisions when you're talking about a huge district. But this is a pretty consistent feeling among many educators that are really passionate about their job. They care deeply about the kids with whom they work. They care deeply about the community in Eau Claire. And a lot of them are from here. A lot of us grew up here, and this is our home. And so I guess I understand the problem is complex, and I'm not trying to simplify it, but I only have a little bit of time left, and so I am trying to focus on one thing that I can talk about, and sort of as a symbol of what the issues are. So the main thing I want to talk about is professional development, because I think that it's something that teachers typically really value. You know, the colleagues with whom I'm interacting with all the time are reflective practitioners. We want to do the best for our students, but for whatever the reason, and we're not entirely clear, professional development has become really prescriptive. It takes the professional out of it a little bit, because it's kind of like boiled down to a lot of PowerPoints and information that many of us feel like we gained from our education courses when we became certified professionals. And it's kind of it's based on a premise of deficiency. And that's kind of the opposite of what I think the district goals are with cultural relevancy, which is sort of an asset model where you build on the strengths of the people that are in your care. Teachers really have a lot of passion and great idea and things that they want to do to help students, but those things have largely been stifled for the sake of commonality. That's not to say that there isn't room for commonality, and not that we don't understand it or appreciate it for what its purpose is, but I think in terms of
I'm sorry, your time has expired.
okay, solutions to problems,
Thank
teachers
you.
should be part of the voice.
But I would encourage you to email. You can email us.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes our public forum section, and takes us now to the reports. Superintendent's report. Dr. Hardebeck.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The report will be very short tonight. I'm going to review the upcoming Board of Education events. All of the events that are listed will take place in the administration building, beginning tomorrow with the Family Advisory Council, which will meet at 7 p.m. The Wellness Committee will meet on November 8th at 3:30 p.m. And I would call your attention to the Demographic Trends and Facility Planning meeting. It has been rescheduled from Thursday's meeting until tomorrow. And that will be on Tuesday, November 6th, and it's been rescheduled because of the availability of the committee members. On November 13th, from 1 to 2:30, the Budget Development Committee will meet. There will also be a special meeting of the Board of Education, and that will take place at 12:30 on that day. November 19th, there's a Policy and Governance Committee meeting, and it begins at 8:45 a.m. And I see that it's marked on your calendar that it's a meeting that all board members should attend, but it really is just a meeting for the Policy and Governance Committee. And then on November 19th, there's a meeting of the school board at 7 p.m. And on November 29th, there's a Gifted Advisory Council meeting, and that takes place at 7 p.m. And that's the end of my report for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Hardebeck. For my board president's report, in almost exactly 12 hours, polls will open across Wisconsin. I sincerely hope that you get out to vote if you have not already voted early. You can visit myvote.wi.gov For more information about your polling place and what you need to bring to vote, the hours for voting are 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. tomorrow. I want to send my good wishes to our first-time 18-year-old voters in the district and extend my appreciation to the many nonpartisan volunteers who helped to register literally hundreds of new college and high school students in Eau Claire to register to vote in tomorrow's election. And I want to share the good news that over 12 school districts across the state have copied and pasted our student-assisted voter registration policy since we passed it. So that's all good news for democracy. We've come so far. We've seen so much progress. We've also seen some missteps. So tonight on election eve, it's important that we all ask ourselves if our little brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews and children and grandchildren should live to see the next century, what change will they see? What history will take place? What protections will be extended? What progress will we have made? This is our chance on Election Day to answer that call. This is our moment to make our voices heard at the ballot box, not just for ourselves in 2018, but for our future. So Election Day is our time to prioritize children and families, to uplift our teachers, to elect candidates who support public schools, not just in word, but in deed, to advance a public discourse of decency, kindness, and inclusion, to affirm the fundamental truth that out of many we are one, and to affirm the words of the late U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone that we all do better when we all do better. So please vote tomorrow. That's my President's report. And that takes us now to our student representative report. Who's going first tonight?
Well, at Memorial, in addition to parent-teacher conferences happening last week, due to recent building construction closing, there have been some reshuffling incidents in the parking lot. And then, in addition, Student Council has been participating in and organizing various item drives, including baby needs, and I believe there's a food drive coming up.
Thank you.
There's not much of a report for North. We've just been getting busy with trying to get students active and aware that they should vote tomorrow and take part in their part of democracy. So encourage everyone to vote.
Thank you both very much. And that takes us now to our school board committee reports. I don't believe we have any committee reports unless if budget development has an update. Okay. And legislative update. Commissioner Torres is not here. Did you want to say anything about the handouts, Commissioner Hammock-Boyle?
I passed out some handouts within the audience tonight. It's just the handout that the Wisconsin Public Education Network, of which the Eau Claire School District is a member of, about voting public tomorrow. We're not specifying any candidates, but the handout really specifies what WPN, the Wisconsin Public Education Network, stands for. They've been out in the forefront relative to advocating for public schools. So you can, if anybody else, if people didn't get a handout, you can go to their websites. You can just Google Wisconsin Public Education Network, and you can find out a lot from what we've worked on as part of their projects and what we've done here in the district the last year. So please go there.
Thank you.
Yep.
That takes us then to our consent resolution agenda. So we will consider approval of these following items. If you'd like to pull one, please indicate that. So we will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of October 22nd, 2018, the minutes of closed session October 22nd, 2018, the minutes of budget hearing and budget adoption of October 29th, 2018, the Human Resources and Employment Report, and then we'll skip over 7.6 through 7.8 and entertain the adoption of 7.9, which is the adoption of American Education Week proclamation. So I would entertain a motion to approve 7.2 through 7.5 and 7.9.
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second? Second. Okay. And these are not financial, so we can do a voice vote on this. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. All right, that motion carries. And again, 7.6 through 7.8 will be automatically placed on our consent agenda for November 19th board meeting. That takes us now to our individually considered resolutions. The first is regarding cash flow borrowing or line of credit, and that is Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. So tonight, I'm here to present a couple of options of what we have for cash flow borrowing. In the past, we've typically done a traditional cash flow borrowing, which is just kind of like a note, a short-term note. But over the course of the last year or so, we've been looking at considering a line of credit, and I thought it was time to bring it forward to the board. So we'll talk about the pros and cons and what is the difference between the two, and at the end, we're going to allow some questions and discussions, and then direction provided from the board and which way we should move for 1819. So just a little bit of history about why do we cash flow borrow. Districts are not fully funded at the beginning of the fiscal year. The majority of our revenues come in large sums at periodic times throughout the years, and it doesn't match up with our cash flow needs because we have payroll and bills every week. Basically, there's another type of expense happening. And those happen, again, recurrently throughout the year. And because we're awaiting those big aid payments or property taxes, we have times during the year where we experience a shortcoming in our cash to meet those cash flow needs on those weekly bases. So for the members of the audience and the school board, we wanted to kind of bucket the big monies that we get and when we get them. So obviously we've been talking a lot about our budget, and property taxes and our state equalization aid are the two largest pieces of revenue that come into play for our operating funds. And so you can see that we don't get any equalization aid. We get a big chunk in December. We get 34% of that aid. Prior to that, we get a 15% deposit in September, and then you get a payment in March and a payment in June. And if we look at our property taxes, we get 50% in February and 50% in August. So it'd be nice if our bills matched up and we only got bills at that point in time, but that's not realistic for us. A couple of the other ones that do have an impact to our budget, that per pupil aid, if you remember, that's about $7 million this year. We'll get that in March. And then our special education aid is the one type of aid that is kind of spread out evenly over the year, but that's about a $5 million revenue in conjunction with, property taxes and our equalization aid in that 50 to 60 million range. Transportation aid we get at the end of January, and then the computer aid actually comes in the next year. So one of the questions that I was asked and I wanted to share with the school board was, what are the top 7 districts doing in the state of Wisconsin to meet their cash flow needs? So Milwaukee, their borrowing consists of commercial paper, and they're doing that for 1 to 2 months. And commercial paper is very risky because that's actually going out to market, and you are potentially looking at bearing the ups and downs of the market. I'm sure they probably have some backing on it, but that's not traditionally something common that you see with cash flow borrowing. When we look at Madison Metropolitan, they do a traditional cash flow borrowing because the dollars are just too high to get a line of credit. Kenosha also does a traditional cash flow borrowing. Then we get to Green Bay, and they do a line of credit. Racine does a line of credit. Appleton was very interesting. They actually have a relationship with their city, and they borrow funds from their city, much like a line of credit, but I think that's a relationship, and they work together to figure out what does that rate look like for them. And Waukesha also does a line of credit. We also reached out to some other districts that may borrow similar amounts to us or are in our local area. So you can see that Chippewa Falls and Oshkosh do the plan traditional borrowing, and that's through PMA. And basically what that is they pool a bunch of school districts together to say, here's how much money we need to borrow collectively as a group, and then they put it all out for bid at once to get a better rate. They also borrow it for a full year, and we have not traditionally borrowed for a full year. Altoona has a line of credit. Hudson and La Crosse don't cash flow borrow at all because they have adequate fund balance, that they don't feel those peaks and valleys and need that cash. Fond du Lac does a line of credit. Verona, Monona Grove, and Sun Prairie do the traditional line of credit. I'm sorry, the traditional cash flow borrowing. Getting them all blended together tonight. So what I learned in talking to these other districts is really 2 common things. The amount needed the timing of when they need it, and their fund balance. So what I learned is some of those traditional cash flow borrowings are because the amounts are so high, they can't get a line of credit from their bank. And so they might be in the 13, 14, or $15 million range of what they need to meet their cash flow needs. And that's very hard for a financial to be able to provide that amount availability for them. And so that's why they lean on that traditional cash flow borrowing. The timing of it also does have an impact because I think it's, do you need it for 12 months? Do you need it for 10 months? Or what do you actually need? Here in Eau Claire, we've shortened that timeline up as close as possible because we're trying to save money and we don't want to borrow it for longer than we need. So we traditionally borrow about the middle of November and we always pay it back after we get our big property tax payment in August. And so, that'll vary a little bit depending on the year and depending on board meetings, and kind of that Thanksgiving holiday also dictates when that happens. But just kind of in comparison to us, this is what other districts are doing. So last year, we borrowed $7 million, and that borrowing actually took place on November 10th, and we had to split it into two because we didn't get one bid that would take the full $7 million. So you can see that the interest rate on the $3 million was 1.26%, and the $4 million was 1.4%. We repaid both of those loans on August 22nd. That had an expense to us for $68,913. I wanted to compare this to what would it have looked like if we had a line of credit. And so if we had a line of credit, these are the times that we estimated we would have needed funds. And kind of as I've shared with the board and budget development before, there's usually a period of time that we need funds. And it might be for about 2 weeks while we're waiting for those big aid payments. So you can see in my chart that we would have needed money the last week of November, and we estimate we would have needed $4 million. The first week of January, we estimated we would have needed $375,000. The second week of January, we estimated we needed $3 million. The third week of January, about $500,000. The second week of February, $650,000. The third week of February, $3.5. And then from June 30th until the middle of August, when we get that tax payment, we estimated we would have needed about $2 million. Then you can see on the right-hand side, if we would have had a line of credit, assuming a 4.25% interest rate, and the interest is being calculated daily when we borrow those funds, that would have cost the district just over $18,500. So when we put those two side by side, you can see that would have been a difference of about $50,000 to our budget last year. And again, we made a lot of assumptions in the line of credit because we didn't have that type last year, but we were trying to get be able to present an example to show what kind of an impact it would have on the budget and how it's different between the traditional cash flow borrowing. So when we looked at some options for 2018-19, we talked with Baird, and they estimate a traditional cash flow borrowing would generate about a 2.4% interest rate for us, and we're estimating that we would need about $7.5 million to cover those peaks and valleys over the course of the next 10 months. We currently have a proposal from Merchants Bank, which is our local financial institution where we do our regular banking, and they had offered us a line of credit, a $7 million line of credit, with a rate not to exceed 5.75%. So we used 5% as kind of an interest rate to calculate what that line of credit interest might cost us. And today, the rate, if we were to have a line of credit, would currently be 4.25%. So we did make it a little higher because we do anticipate that interest rates will go up. And if everything would play out in the next 10 months just like we planned, it would potentially have a savings of $108,000 when we compare a regular traditional cash flow borrowing and a line of credit. I can't say for sure that's what's going to happen. That's our best guess based upon the expenses that we think and the timing that's going to happen over the next 10 months. So if we want to talk about pluses and deltas for the cash flow borrowing, the pluses would include that the debt is tax exempt and the interest rate is lower. We're comfortable with the process as we have done it in the past, and that interest rate is locked in over the term of the loan. Deltas include that we borrow the lump sum and we anticipate our needs up front. Even though there's points in time that we might not need the whole $7.5 million, it's a one-time thing and you borrow it for that entire time. Interest is accruing throughout that whole time because, again, you get the funds up front. And so that causes us to pay interest when we don't need the funds. And then again, we would borrow in November and pay off in August. And there's times throughout there, I showed you on the calendar, that we likely don't need all of those funds. They also include a regulatory bid. And it typically will cost more than the line of credit because you're borrowing that interest for that full period of time instead of when you really need those funds. If we look at a line of credit, the pluses include that we borrow the funds only when we need it. We only borrow the amount that we need to make our payments for that week or 2 weeks. Interest is paid only when we're using those funds, and it's at a financial institution where our banking regularly occurs. Deltas include that it is going to be a higher interest rate because the debt issuance is not tax exempt. And at June 30th, we need to anticipate how much funds we need until the budget is adopted. Typically for us, that would run from June 30th until the middle of August because we get that large property tax payment, and that generally carries us through until the budget's adopted and we can borrow again. A potential question that we don't want to overlook is that other local financials may ask, why didn't we solicit bids for a line of credit? And my response to that would be, is it makes most business sense to have your line of credit right where you do your regular banking. And we do bid our banking services every 5 years, and so we would include that as part of our next bid, is that we would look to add a line of credit in there as well if that's something that the board would choose to go down that road. Then I wanted to just kind of put them side by side in a picture because I know sometimes that's helpful. And so again, when we talk about borrowing funds only when needed, that's going to happen under a line of credit. Borrowing the amount that's only needed is also going to be under the line of credit. Interest paid only when funds are used, we'll find in the line of credit. At the financial, where your primary banking relationship exists, is under the line of credit. And then that interest cost for anticipated needs from June 30th until that budget adoption, again, is going to be at the line of credit. You will get a lower interest rate with a cash flow borrowing, and the regulatory bid is required by state statute under the traditional cash flow borrowing. Just one thing to highlight for the board is that regulations dictate that districts cannot borrow any new funds between July 1st and the budget adoption. And so that's why we have to predict how much funds do we need from the end of June until that budget is adopted. So what questions do you have, and what discussion would you like to have before we go on?
Well, thank you for this presentation. Would you mind going back to the slide that shows the lacrosse? For public education purposes, there was a slide that showed the one right before it that shows the 7. That's because we're the 8th largest. Not everyone probably knows that that's watching. But if you want to go to the next one, it's obviously interesting when you look at the lacrosse scenario. They do not have to do any of this anyways because they have an adequate fund balance. And as many of you may be aware, when we were presenting about the referendum, we were talking about how lacrosse, because of our arbitrary and antiquated funding system in our state, literally has had over $100 million more than us since 1993. So we very well wouldn't even have to be having this conversation right now if it were not for that. But what'd you say? Yeah, well, there you go. But I appreciate that we're having this conversation because we're looking at what can we do to maximize savings for the district. And I'm glad that I asked about this, and I'm glad that you're working on it. I first thought of the line of credit just kind of offhand because right before I ran for the school board, I was my church's treasurer, and we embarked on getting a line of credit. Now, obviously, our church budget was, I think, like $350,000, but it was attractive for our church to pursue that, and I thought, well, we ought to look at that. So I think that, and I will say this too, this seems to be something that folks understand in the community. I had a guy come up to me at Quick Trip after this was in the paper, and he said, "You're that school board guy. I don't agree with you on anything, but I like that line of credit thing." I'm like, that's awesome. Well, thanks. Enjoy your Quick Trip chicken sandwich. Have a good day, whatever. But so it seems like folks understand this. But I certainly like the line of credit idea versus cash flow borrowing for a number of reasons. I think that even with the higher interest rate, we're still going to be saving money. And, we're looking at cost savings over $50,000, well over $50,000, but over 50 last year it would have been. So I think it's something that we should definitely pursue. I'm very partial to the idea, also because we have the ability to go back. If we do it, and for whatever reason we don't like it, we can change our mind and go back. But in my opinion, we can't afford to not pursue it. And yeah, so that's where I'm at with it. But if board members have questions about it or comments, I would definitely open the floor for that. Commissioner Hambuck-Boyle.
Thanks, Joe, or thanks, President Luganbill. The question I have is, when you look at a line of credit, what are the pluses for our lender? And is the interest rate negotiable?
I think the pluses for our local vendor is just another banking relationship for them. I think that they try really hard to service all of our needs, and this is just another way that they can. I'll share a little background with you. So typically when we do our traditional cash flow borrowing, we don't get local banks to bid on our borrowing because of the dollar amount. And so this year, after last year when our local financial merchants, that's who we work with, wasn't able to bid because he needed to dot some I's and cross some T's with his board. So probably about 4 or 5 months ago, he called me up and he said, I'd really like to be able to bid on your cash flow borrowing. Can you get me this information? And so he actually worked with his vice presidents and kind of the lending board to say, if we get an opportunity to bid on this, how can we do that? So they worked really diligently. They asked a lot of questions, and they're prepared to do either one, which is unusual because with a $7 or $7.5 million, that's hard for one financial to kind of take that on because that's a lot of money for them. So I guess we haven't talked a lot about pros with them. I think that the interest rate, I haven't talked specifics with him. I know that he told us that their bid, I guess you would say, or their proposal is prime less 1%. And so that's where the 4.25% came from because prime is currently at 5.25. They did do a rate cap because they also want to minimize our risk as well. And so the rate cap is, if prime were to get to 6.75, less 1% would be 5.75. He told us that if prime goes to 6.75, we all have a much bigger problem than that. And that is guaranteed for a year. And so he doesn't think it's likely that the rates would go that up to 5.75. It's currently at 4.25. And so he said that would be, just for our economy in general, that would be a 1.5% increase over the next year. And he said the likelihood of that happening on the banking side, they don't believe that to happen. They do expect interest rates to increase, but not as significant as what that looks like. I don't know, because we didn't formally put it out to bid, I'm not sure how negotiable it is. And so I could ask that question if I needed to.
I have 2 other questions, and if other board members have questions, let me know. One is regarding the decision point we'd have for, if, say, we move forward with this for this year, and we hear something crazy out of the Federal Reserve regarding interest rates, and we want to go back to traditional cash flow borrowing. Would we have time to do that and to go back, to revert back for not for the at this point in the 2019-20 school year? Would we have the ability to? We would.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Because what we would be looking at is cash flow borrowing for the 18-19 year.
Right.
And so again, it would kind of span through this budget year, but we definitely would have the opportunity to change back to a traditional.
So we have the chance, so we can monitor and see.
Absolutely.
Okay. The other question is, I know we have the roughly $100,000 difference in total estimated interest payments. Does that take into account the any additional costs incurred due to it not being tax exempt?
So there really isn't any additional costs.
Okay.
So that was another thing I think I forgot to share with the line of credit that was being proposed and I'm presenting tonight. There aren't any additional fees. So when we go to advance the funds, there's not fees for us to that. It's just, okay, Eau Claire needs $2 million, we get $2 million, and our only cost is the interest cost. Now, there are some fees, legal fees, because there's legal paperwork that needs to be done, but that's a one-time fee, and we have that every year with the cash flow borrowing. But outside of that, there's not additional fees. And the other advantage of having it at the same institution where our checking account is, there's no like wire fees or anything like that, because they can just do the transfer internally.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Vu.
I have two questions. First question is, what is the implication of the local financial organization that might be asking the question why the district didn't solicit bids? What is that implication? Second question is 108,000 differences, what that money would have meant for the district.
I'm writing it down so I make sure I can answer it for you. So the implication for the other local financials, I just wanted to make everybody be aware that we may get questions from other financials. So on occasion, Associated Bank may come to us, Wells Fargo may come to us, or other local financials and say, I would have liked a shot at that line of credit. And so, and basically it was my response is the fact that our banking services are currently with merchants. That was under our bid agreement. And because there are no additional fees to advance the funds, that's why we would recommend staying with merchants. And then when it's time to go to bid, which is either going to be this coming year or in a year for banking services, we would add that as an option if the board decided that we wanted to do a line of credit again. We would include that as part of the bid, and you know, what are the additional fees associated with a line of credit? What does an interest rate look like? Just to get a feel so that way that we can have an accurate comparison. My concern about putting it out there now is that most financials will have a wire transfer fee to get the funds into your account, and a lot of times there's other fees related to that line of credit for just having it open or also taking an advance on that. And so I just wanted to be very transparent and know that we may get questions from other institutions because they may come back and say, you know, why didn't you look at us for a line of credit? And then your second question, what does the $108,000 mean to us? I can put it real easily. That would be one teaching FTE for the district. Our average that we're using is 93,000 for an FTE for certified staff for this year. So it'd be a little bit more than that, but that equates to essentially one position for the district.
Good questions. And I think that's an important point, asking about what the financial institute, how we approach that. I think it makes sense certainly if we're going to move forward with it, which it sounds like we probably should, but that we have it all in-house. That the line of credit is included with all the other services that we bid with a financial institution. When, just logistically, is the bid up again with that?
It's either this year or next year. It's a 5-year bid that we do, so it's in the very near future. I just didn't pull it to see.
So I think that's another factor in this that, you know, could minimize folks' concerns, is saying, look, this is incorporating it as part of this, but, you know, it's going to be open for bid if we move forward with it in 2020 or whatever, 2019, whatever. Okay. Any other? Sure. Commissioner Bika?
I assume you would have included it if it were a possibility because you're knowledgeable and very thorough. But are there other options that could involve collaboration with another entity, a county, city, or something else like another school district?
Yeah, I think that there is. I think years and years ago, we did have a relationship with the city of Eau Claire. And I don't know that we use them for cash flow borrowing needs, but I know that many, many years ago there was a joint bank account between the school district and the city. I know that hasn't been an option, so I started in 2006, and I know that we were separate from that point on. I think it depends on your relationship, and I also think it depends on the timing and the needs, and what does your cash flow look like? You know, is another agency cash flow surplus, you know, when we need that? And so it's hard to say, because I think about the tax payments, which are a big part of our operating budget. You know, the city and the county are getting those payments at the same time as us, because they're making them to us. So I'm not sure, but it's certainly could project a conversation. As far as the other school districts, I think that if we wanted to do that, we would need to look at that PMA plan and look at what does that look like, because that's already kind of there. My concern would be with that is that we're one of the latest school districts to borrow and one of the first to pay back, and so then we could be increasing our costs because we would be borrowing those funds for later, because I don't think there's flexibility in the time that you can borrow. They kind of all do it at the same time. So, but that could certainly be an option. If the board wants us to look at it, we certainly could.
Okay. Well, and I think Commissioner Beeka brings up a good point just about collaboration. And I think that as we, move forward with the Revenue Committee and talk about things that we can do systemically, looking at collaborative purchasing, collaborative borrowing with other entities, I think that is an important part of it. And I know that we used to have a joint account with the city because we were a city school district before we became unified a couple decades ago as our own entity. So we were, in essence, a wing of the city. But yeah, do board members? Basically, the question before us tonight is, and I'm not sure, Secretary Iverson, if we have a suggested motion in board docs regarding it. Do we have?
We included both in there, so
Okay.
we will just, based on what the board decides, we can modify that accordingly.
So what we would need is a motion to entertain the creation of a line of credit at a special board meeting. Would that be the motion?
Yeah, if you want, I could show you the timeline for
That'd be-
each of the options.
That'd be fine.
If you wanted to see
Are board
that.
members good with looking at the timeline now, or do we have more? Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do that.
So I have two separate slides because I'm not sure which direction the board wanted to
Okay.
go. They're very similar, but there are a few differences. So if we were going to proceed with a regular cash flow borrowing, which is what we've done in the past, we would finalize the paperwork with the attorney and we would send it out for bid by Wednesday of this week. The bids would be due back to us on November 13th, which is next Tuesday. And we would have them in time for the special board meeting that is already set for Tuesday at 12:30 to approve the resolution. And that's basically approving the bid and then signing the paperwork. And then we turn around and send that back to the winner of the bid. That way we can get our funds in time for the Thanksgiving holiday, because we have a payday right after Thanksgiving. If the board recommends that we move forward with a line of credit, we still have some paperwork that we would finalize with the attorney, again, by this week on Wednesday. The special board meeting would still happen on Tuesday, the 13th at 12:30 to approve the resolution for the line of credit. And then, again, we would have funds in time for that payroll that happens the week of Thanksgiving. So the paperwork is a little bit different, and we've already been talking with the attorney about that quickness in finalizing that, and they're prepared to help us meet all of these deadlines, so.
Okay.
Okay.
So the motion that we would need would be for that we direct the administration to work to initiate a line of credit with Merchants Bank?
Yeah, that would
Okay.
be the motion.
Okay. So someone want to make that motion? And do you have that for the minutes?
So move.
Okay. Do you want
Second?
Okay, and do you have that, Secretary Iverson? Okay. Is there any discussion on that? Yes, Commissioner Abbott-Boyle.
I just had a question. So if we bid this every 5 years, but if we continue to use a line of credit, would it behoove us to think about going to bid more often? If somebody really wanted to have that line of, you know what I'm saying, yeah?
So we've traditionally bid our banking services every 5 years, and the line of credit would have to be renewed every single year, just because of the timing with the budgets, and that legal paperwork has to be done every single year. So I think that we would want to talk about, do we want to put it out separately from the banking services, or do we want to incorporate it in there? My recommendation would be to put it all together, and then maybe we look at a shorter term for the banking services, just because there's a lot of value of having it at the same place.
Yeah, and also the competition.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have the motion. Do you want to read the motion, Secretary Iverson?
The board directs administration to initiate a line of credit with Merchants Bank.
Okay. And seeing no other discussion, let's do a roll call vote on this one.
Commissioner Luganville,
Yes.
Commissioner Vu,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Hambuck-Boyle.
Yes.
Okay, and that motion carries, and then we will look to authorize that resolution at our special board meeting when we'll have a 2/3 majority present of the board. So, thank you very much, Ms.
Thank you very
Johnson.
much.
Okay, that takes us now to our second individually considered resolution. This is a resolution that shouldn't take too long. This is asking that the board agree to sign on to a letter supporting a state-managed flood mitigation revolving loan fund. So I'll just provide a brief explanation. There was a letter that was sent over the weekend to board members. This is basically just asking that we sign on to a letter to Congress as one of the Wisconsin-based organizations or agencies that supports the creation of this program. And it matters to public schools because nearly 4 million public school students nationwide attend classes in buildings that have either repeatedly flooded or face a high risk of flooding. And more than 6,000 public schools across the United States are located in federally designated flood zones. We currently, as a school district, have a building located in a location designated by FEMA as an area with potential flood hazard. We have current policy regarding our safety program to reduce hazards and unsafe conditions, and basically the creation of a state-managed flood mitigation revolving loan fund, which is a very fun long name. It would allow for local districts and municipalities to receive low-interest loans and grants for mitigation projects and preventative safety projects. That would not only be for schools like ours in the district, but it would also be for public facilities in our communities like the Pablo Center, which is located in an area. So using these funds, architects, organizations, school districts would be able to elevate buildings, turn repeatedly flooded areas into open green spaces, or improve their storm damage systems. Yeah, we know that about every dollar that's spent on hazard mitigation nationally saves about $6 in cleanup costs. So that is what this letter is about, and we would just be one of the we'd be one of the only educational organizations to sign on to it. And I felt that would be a good opportunity for us because this is something that impacts schools and that districts would be eligible for. So I don't know if board members have any questions or comments on it. Otherwise, we would just need a motion that the school district sign on to the letter to Congress. And I do want to note that this is a effort that's been pushed by the Pew Charitable Trusts, and it has co-sponsors of Republicans and Democrats, and it's expected that it will pass in the next session. So it'd be good to have our name on something that passes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Has it been brought up and tried to be passed already, or this is new?
This is new.
Okay.
This is something that they've been talking about. They've been meeting with FEMA about it, and it has a lot of support. So they're hopeful about its chances. And it is, again, it's a state-managed program. So, yeah. Any board members have questions or comments? Okay. Then we would just need a motion to sign on to the letter on behalf of the district.
So moved.
Okay. Okay. All those in favor of signing the letter, please say aye. Aye. Okay, that was everyone. So we're on the letter. Yeah. Yeah, and it'll get sent out to the House of Representatives, and I think they said anyone who signed on to it in like 2.5 weeks. So after the election, obviously. Okay. Now we will adjourn to committee. And our first committee report item for discussion is an update on the status of the scope and planning of our school district listening sessions. And that is Ms. Kohler and Mr. Lyons. Good evening.
Good evening. Mr. Lyons and I are here again tonight to provide an update on the status of the scope and planning of the upcoming listening sessions regarding the recent recommendation of the Demographic Trends and Facilities Planning Committee. As I've shared in the past, the recommendation of the committee is aligned to the district strategic plan in the areas of academic achievement, student social emotional growth, and partnerships with families and community. Just as a reminder, the committee shared in October 2 potential solutions that met the needs of the entire district. Option number 1 was to develop a plan to repurpose Roosevelt into a 4K center, including a facility upgrade for that purpose, to reestablish elementary boundaries, absorbing Roosevelt students into the surrounding elementary schools so that Roosevelt could become a 4K center, and developing a facility plan to address capacity issues on Southside elementary schools. Option number 2 was to develop a plan to address capacity issues on the north side of the district by maintaining Roosevelt as an elementary site. This would include reestablishing elementary boundaries district-wide in order to balance enrollments, as well as a facility plan for Roosevelt as an elementary school. This plan would also call for the district to develop a separate plan for dealing with the capacity issues at Prairie Ridge, and to develop a third facility plan to address the capacity issues of Southside elementary schools. Understanding the importance of sharing information and answering the questions of stakeholders, at the last board meeting, we discussed a plan for listening sessions in a bit more detail. Based on that discussion, it was determined that the listening sessions would provide information about both potential solutions, options 1 and 2 that I shared on the previous slide. The listening sessions, we decided, would also include information about how elementary boundaries would be impacted under each option. The third thing that was discussed was to present scenarios for families detailing what would happen if current middle school geographic boundaries were maintained, or if current middle school feeder school patterns were maintained. And we also decided that we would share the cost projection regarding facility needs for each, and those projections would be developed by a director of buildings and grounds, Larry Sommerfeld, who is a trained architect with LEED certification. So we discussed that at the last meeting. We're coming to you tonight to look at the scope of those listening sessions and to gather a little bit more information. And at this time, Mr. Lyons is going to talk you through some of those slides.
Well, good evening again. It's a pleasure to be here. As you know, the recommendations were the result of the committee's work, and they really focused on 3 defined areas, those being early childhood space needs, north side undercapacity needs, and south side overcapacity needs. So let's talk a little bit about early childhood space, because there's been questions around the data for that. There was a point at which the committee went out to Prairie Ridge and saw firsthand some of the overcrowding that was at that institution. But we also have a data that backs that up as well. And for instance, in 2015-16, 4K served 808 students. The third Friday counts in September this year show that we're serving 853 students. And of course, we partner with community sites to provide 4K programming, and then we wrap around support for those families. And because Prairie Ridge is at capacity, this year we also placed approximately 100 4K students that are not otherwise connected to a child care center in the community in 4K. And so those 100 students are students that we could serve in Prairie Ridge or another facility if there was space allowed. So that's another capacity issue that needs to be brought into the conversation.
Could I ask, and you don't have to answer it right now,
Yeah.
but I know we have the extending duration opportunity through Head Start now.
That's
and
my
it's,
neck bullet.
oh, that's your next
bullet
thing?
So
Okay.
yes, both at a state and a federal level, full day programming is really on the rise. It's getting a lot of attention. And it's actually, as an example, and you probably know this, Joe, it's in Tony Evers' biennial budget as one of the focal points. And extended duration as a part of the Head Start duration standards with a plan that's going to be phased in over the next 3 years. And the stats and the information that that was provided said if those changes are implemented at a minimum, they project needing 9 additional 4K classrooms to serve the students. And it would be noted that 4K students attending full day, of course, is at a whole different price rate than those currently in the half-day programming. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I just know that there's the current, I believe, grant program, which is out there, but I think that what we're still waiting on is the final rule on the Head Start performance standards and if they're going to expand it. And I know I've seen Heidi White nodding. Am I tracking? Okay. So, right. But it's definitely federally, it's a good indicator when if they come out with a grant program that's expanding it, it's probably a good indicator that in the near future the performance standards themselves will expand to reflect that, I would assume. If that's the best practice that they're pushing, you know.
If you're at the facility, you can see how overcrowded it is. We've added about 5% students. We have 100 that we know of in capacity, and then there's this extra capacity that isn't really been brought in. So, we click here?
You don't need to.
Oh.
It just brings to it.
Oh, okay. So, moving on, in some areas of the district, we have the capacity to welcome and serve new families. In other areas of the district, that capacity is limited. Current boundaries mean that several elementary schools are operating at about 65% capacity. That's one of the charges to the committee that we need to focus on, bringing that above the 65% capacity, while others are nearing the 100% capacity mark, which is also a concern to the committee. Although there are some areas of potential growth on the north side, shifting elementary boundaries would allow schools in the area with empty seats and classrooms to serve several hundred more students in their current facilities. When considering long-term planning, there's a greater and more urgent need to address the shortage of space in the elementary schools where the capacity, of course, is at 100%. At a board request, the committee was asked to go out and identify or find out a little bit of data underneath that. Where are the growth? Is the growth on the south side, on the north side? I think northwest was specifically asked about. And so the committee ended up calling 17 clerks regarding developments in those particular areas. And although we're waiting to hear still from a couple of clerks, those serving in the area of north of Roosevelt, we've heard from several others, and this is what we've learned. The town of Brunswick has 55 single lots and new subdivisions. 38 of them have new construction or are completing new construction for single family homes. These are in the Putnam Heights attendance area. The town of Pleasant Valley has a new subdivision with space for 70 homes. 18 are being constructed, and they anticipate plans for another subdivision of equal size on the other side of 93. So 70 homes and another on the other side, 70 homes, about 140 total. Though that subdivision is in the Meadowview area and the Robbins area. The Village of Lake Hallie in the Sam Davy area reports that Hallie Ridge has vacant lots, but they're not filling up. And they've also reported space for 13 homes in Hunter Ridge. The town of Seymour, serving Northwoods, was not aware of any residential developments. So when you take all of the seats, there's 1,036 seats that are available in the district, and 800 of the seats of the 1,036 are in Sherman, Longfellow, Sam Davy, Locust Lane, and Northwoods. I mentioned that the last time I was here. The remaining seats, 230, are in Meadowview, Mans, and Putnam, and Robbins. So given the communication from the area clerks, we feel fairly confident that we have the capacity to serve the north side families and are also sure that we are running into some major constraints in the south side. So in our examination of the three needs, the committee explored solutions that would provide the most responsible use of taxpayer dollars and address equity issues that all families should expect that extend beyond the physical structures of the school. And so we Also wanted to talk a little bit about broadening this discussion. As we prepare for these listening sessions where this issue started with the focal point of Roosevelt, we'd like to ask that the board consider broadening that discussion from Roosevelt to boundaries and facility needs at pre-K and elementary levels. So let me say that one more time. Boundaries and facility needs at pre-K and elementary levels. So Roosevelt's absolutely a component of this recommendation. It's a very important component. But as we explore the boundary changes and the expansion, many elementary boundaries throughout the district are going to be impacted. Northwoods, Locust Lane, Sam Davy, Roosevelt, Sherman, Lakeshore, and potentially Longfellow would all be impacted in some way by shifting the boundaries. What we want people to realize that this is a much bigger look across the entire district. We've been talking a lot about Roosevelt. It's impacting a lot of boundaries across the district. And as we begin to look at the potential of the south side expansion, Robbins, Mans, Meadowview, Putnam Heights could also potentially be impacted by those boundary changes. So the listening sessions, families from Roosevelt have contacted the board asking excellent questions, which I think is probably a testament that the process is working. And they have talked about and asked questions about what's the detailed breakdown of costs for each of the options presented by the committee. Great question. What exactly are the needs at 4K and what's the reason for expansion, the underlying need? Has the potential growth of residential areas within the district been studied and considered? The fourth question, what are the new boundaries and where would my child attend? Very important question. What parts of these options will require a referendum and what parts would not require a referendum? And the committee agrees that these are all excellent questions that are families and the communities that they want to know. We'd like to answer them throughout these listening sessions because either option presented would impact many families from many schools. We believe it's important that the listening sessions focus on pre-K, the elementary schools, the boundaries really throughout the district. And so in conclusion, the committee's requesting tonight that we broaden the focus of the listening sessions from Roosevelt to pre-K and elementary facilities as listening sessions. Listening sessions would be held throughout the district, sharing details from both options presented, including estimated costs, potential boundary changes, and middle school scenarios. Sessions would also offer the community opportunity to share potential solutions to the enrollment and facility needs at pre-K and elementary levels, and to ask many clarifying questions. And with that, we would provide an opportunity for comment and questions or further direction.
Okay, I'll wait for the, Commissioner Hembeck-Boyle, did you have your light on?
I did, but go ahead.
No, you go ahead first.
I really like the idea of broadening this conversation. I think that's what came out of when Demo Trends presented the first time. I think this is valuable dialogue to have and good for our community. Again, I think maybe we'll bring up too the fact that we are one community and not a north-south side, and that we can have those discussions as well. Well done. Thank you.
I concur with Commissioner Hembeck-Boyle. I love that we're broadening it. I think that's what we need to be doing. I also do appreciate, as you do, Mr. Lyons, I almost made you a school board member. It's a Commissioner Lyons. But I appreciate that, like you, the feedback that we've received from parents, because the feedback, by and large, has been very focused on facts and figures and interested in getting information and broadening the discussion. And that is, like we said at the last board meeting, that's what we want, because we want to elevate that. We want to elevate the position of parents in this conversation to be a part of the solution. And yeah, so I would definitely agree with broadening it. And yeah, any other board members have Yep, Commissioner Bika?
Yeah, I really appreciate the information, the way that the focus is kind of evolving, but I'll be honest, I'm having a very difficult time imagining how this, at least of what I know so far, translates successfully into listening sessions. I think I mentioned this before. I think I don't know the number of sessions, the duration of each session. I find it impossible to consider all of this being effectively presented. I think I would need more information. Is this an information session? It's a presentation with people just attending, and how that's different from a true listening session where there's an active exchange and discussion that even goes beyond just a question and answer. I would need to know more about how would we serve. I understand that many families and schools are going to be affected, but Roosevelt families would be affected in a rather unique way. So how will we serve those families in particular with these sessions? And so I guess just for me, it's very abstract, you know, at this point. And like I said, I'm having a hard time translating it into actual meeting time.
I think that's good feedback. I mean, I know that we're, I believe our plan is that we're going to actually talk about the format of the sessions on the 19th, if I'm accurate. Okay. So I think that's good feedback, though, for them to talk about, and maybe talk about how do we break this down? How do we make it as useful as possible? And how do we perhaps localize the topic that we're talking about versus, you know, if we're talking about it at different schools, different sides of town, are there specific things that we need to be bringing up? I'm just as far as logistically, you're taking this tomorrow, this kind of idea, and talking about what the sessions would include to the Family Advisory Council tomorrow, right? Are they meeting tomorrow, or was it okay? And then bringing back some draft to us on the 19th for us to actually potentially approve. Is that?
We have we have a demo and trends meeting where we will try to answer some of the questions on this slide here. So as an example, what are the proposed new boundaries for each? We want to try to finalize that. What would it mean for if current middle school boundaries were maintained or feeder school systems were maintained? We want to make sure that we have a final recommendation of what that could look like. And then I think we want to talk about also what will the listening sessions entail, and how do we support families through questions and through transition, and how do we gather information from families. So that is the work of the next 2 weeks, and then we would be here on the 19th, 2 weeks from today, right, to share some of that information.
Okay.
Or a rough draft of what that information might look like.
And I think that Commissioner Bika's comment about, I mean, I think what you're basically getting at is we want to make sure these listening sessions are accessible and user-friendly, and not just a information dump, but that it's an actual dialogue. I mean, and that's crucial. We don't want it to just be a presentation. So I'm certain that you can come to us with something that articulates that. And I think what we talked about last meeting was, you know, maybe breaking it down to having different topics for different sessions, you know, because this is vast, and it's a lot. So do you want board members to send emails with their specific ideas or questions as you develop this in preparation for the 19th? Would that be helpful for you if a board member thinks of something regarding this, to send it to you, or would that be okay?
Yeah, that would be welcomed. It is big, and trying to make it meaningful is probably the most important piece. So ideas around that would be appreciated. That is one of the questions that we'll talk about with the Family Advisory Council tomorrow, is what sort of questions would they anticipate families will have? What sort of information do they think families might want or need? So I think the more proactive we can be on that front, the better.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to be mindful too, because we do have 3 board members not here, so I'll make sure that we get that information out to everyone on the board to send in if they have questions or comments or ideas specific to the development of this plan leading up to the 19th, so that no one is particularly surprised with what we're looking at on the 19th, and we've all had the ability to send our feedback, so that'll be good. Okay. Do any other board members have comments or questions? Okay. This is a committee report, so there is the opportunity for public feedback. Did you have anything else, though, that you want to add? Okay. Thank you very much. There's opportunity for public feedback. It has to come in the form of a question because it's a committee report, and we won't necessarily provide an answer to you tonight back and forth. But if folks in the audience would like to ask a question for it to be in the record, now is the opportunity to do so. Okay. Not seeing anything. We will move on then to our next agenda item, which is a professional development update for culturally responsive practices. And thank you, Mr. Lyons. And we have Mr. Schmidt.
Good evening. This presentation will start with a district lens first, and then we'll go into a building perspective during the second half of the presentation. The title of this in the executive summary and board doc says Professional Development Update for Culture Responsive Practices. The professional development work we do would not be successful without our focus on culture responsive practices. So why do this? Our systems assessment told us that we have a long history of starting multiple initiatives, and after a few years seeing those initiatives go by the wayside, we feel we need a more sustainable approach. Our strategic plan focus is to build capacity of our staff to respond to the needs of our students and nurturing the social and emotional development of those students while at the same time raising the academic achievement levels of all students and closing the achievement gaps. This is tough work. Critical component of our approach to professional development is to help staff make connections among the many strategies we are using that support student growth. Multi-level systems of support, which I will describe to you later. And this requires a coordinated effort and a collective effort, hence it's aligned. This means that we are all learning about the same strategies at the same time at sometimes. Something that you heard of in the, not in such a positive feedback during the opening comments. A somewhat new practice in our district. This has been going on now for a couple of years, but one that's absolutely essential if we are to sustain progress. It's important that we have time to learn together, to connect and articulate our learning, and like students, adults need to connect with one another to increase the quality of their performance. And we have evidence of success with this approach with our high school advanced placement program, elementary with math expressions, our PBIS at the pre-K-12, that when we do something with purposefulness and focus, we do get very positive results. We have put a number of systems in place to ensure that the learning is available. We have a school calendar that offers not only professional development time, but also time provided for instructional planning and collaboration. And we have PD Wednesdays, summer institutes, and other opportunities for staff learning. And we use many data points to guide our professional development. This is complicated work, and we'll go over what that looks like as we start talking about the alignment to the strategic plan. So in the strategic plan, these are the 4 major areas of the 5, but I did want to mention that in 1.1, articulate and align a culturally relevant, rigorous, and engaging curriculum and assessment system under academic achievement. In student social and emotional growth, maintain a safe and supportive learning environment. And that's part of the literacy within supportive learning environments that we've been speaking with you about in the past. Under collaborative cultures, support professional learning community structures and professional learning, because we know that professional learning communities is one of the strongest professional development activities that our staff can engage in. And finally, on 4.3, under high quality staff, focus professional development on long-term implementation of a few high quality strategic initiatives. The input on the professional development plan happens through several channels. This is not a simple, we just write a plan up in a closet and come out with an outcome. includes many committees, and Kay shared those at the opening of schools report with you, all the district committees that provide feedback to us, and those committees and that feedback drives a lot of the decision making we have under professional development. Dave Oldenburg also leads another team called Professional Supports for Educators that even met this evening. That's a pre-K-12 group of educators that provides feedback on the overall professional development plan for the district. It's not a simple process, like I said, but involves many feedback loops along the way. You've seen this graphic before. The district's work on the whole child has led us to lead to a more systemic and culturally responsive way to support our children. And in doing so, we look to guidance from the Department of Public Instruction, and this is the will, skill, and fill diagram that we showed you before. The Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, the Wisconsin RTI Center, and the Disproportionality Technical Assistance Network have collaboratively developed a model to inform culturally responsive practices in this illustration. The model describes the beliefs, knowledge, and skills Wisconsin educators and schools cultivate to reach and teach diverse learners and achieve equity within their multi-level systems of support. And this model describes ways of being and knowing needed to develop systems that respectfully engage learners and families who have historically been underserved in Wisconsin schools. We disaggregate data to ensure growth of all students. All of our student engagement survey indicators, those were of course an average, score for each of our subgroups of students of color showed increased average scores on our student engagement survey, except for one area, which was our Asian students, which was slightly down in the area of cognitive engagement, but was steady in social and emotional learning engagement. Of course, we use this simply as one indicator, as we know that social emotional learning tools should not be used in accountability measures, as been guided to us by the Department of Public Instruction and others. We are building off of last year's work. There was a lot of work done in the will area, and we have 4 areas of focus this year aligned with equitable classroom practices, in particular in the literacy area under modeling, conferring, volume, and choice. And the focus on skill is part of our focus for this year. This work is limited to the groups it applies to, so it's not a one-size-fits-all, and not every we don't do everything to all groups of staff because it just simply doesn't fit. The wheel fits into a larger multi-level systems of support at the state level. For Wisconsin schools and districts, implementing an equitable multi-level system of support means providing equitable services, practices, and resources to every learner based upon responsiveness to effective instruction, intervention, and a system of high-quality instruction, strategic use of data, collaboration, and collaboration to interact with a continuum of supports to facilitate learner success. This has culturally responsive practices embedded in it and has driven the district's multi-level system of support, which we're going to bring you through right now. The system districts, and this is what has driven much of our professional development over the past year, and focuses on 4 major fundamental structures, organizational structures, which are the elements put in place to build an MLSS in building a district. Strong shared leadership, which has representative teams with responsibility to lead and oversee implementation of an equitable multi-level system of support at the school and district level. Positive culture, which is the school and district's prevailing belief, values, practices, that are instrumental to the success of implementation of an MLSS system. And finally, family and community engagement, having family and communities active partners and key collaborators in achieving the goals for each learner. This has a tier approach. You've seen this with all 3 tiers, but at the fundamental tier 1, it focuses on collaboration, a systemic process for learners, families, educators, and community working together to ensure academic, behavioral, social, and emotional success for every learner. Guaranteeing viable curriculum and high-quality instruction, which is curricula, teaching practices, and learning environments that are standards-based, evidence-based, and engaging, differentiated, culturally responsive, and data-driven. Balanced assessment, which is a range of formative, summative, and screening assessment tools to develop a comprehensive picture of a picture of the status of each student. And finally, again, the family engagement that we discussed earlier. This is within Tier 1, we have 4 different strategies that lead to its success, and one is monitoring of progress. The progress monitoring and processes that are used to gauge individual learner responsiveness to interventions or additional challenges. Our strategic use of data, which is the ongoing reflective and collaborative analysis and implementation of outcome data in a problem-solving process to inform improvement and achieve equity. Differentiation, which is using a variety of instructional strategies to support learners as needed, and supportive learning environments, which is creating a culturally responsive environment to support all learners. The continuum of supports deepens at Tier 2, which is high quality instruction, collaboration, and strategic use of data, a variety of varying intensity to equitably address the needs of every learner, and using those three of those same four strategies that we discussed earlier. And finally, deepening that level of support and intensity for students who need those supports at a Tier 3 level, and the structures in place to support that. So our current work this year, to get to the detail, that's a bit of the backdrop, is again, we look at the literacy within supportive learning environments, and that is, we are in our third year of this process, and it is a deliberate infusion of culturally responsive practices into learning briefs for our staff. We are at the point where the project where common pre and post assessments are being constructed with staff input and informed by Common Core state standards to assess student skills in essential writing skills. This common rubric ensure common grade level expectations and vertical progressions and rigor pre-K through 12. And again, we focused on this area because if you think of our major assessments, the Forward exam and the ACT Aspire, both of them have writing as a key component as part of that assessment, or a part of that academic accountability for our staff. The second piece in our current work is continuing our professional development in academic career planning, creating equitable opportunities for students to prepare for access post-secondary opportunities. We have increased the footprint of this significantly this year. The positive behavior intervention and supports, creating a system that has culturally responsive structures to support all students. Nonviolent crisis intervention, like most behavior systems and training, the focus is first on recognizing that students each come to us with a different story and being able to intervene before behaviors escalate. This is new to us this year. This was not on our list last year. Mental health first aid, which is exactly what it sounds like. First aid training for mental health needs that express themselves in the classroom, and we will be training on November 19th and 20th all secondary certified staff in the district in this area. Part of the safe schools from the Department of Justice program requires that we train all full-time staff, which we have defined as over 50% FTE, that have contact with students in trauma-sensitive schools. That training is taking place throughout the year for our certified staff, and during two different professional development days, one in January and one in February for our hourly staff. And then the Social Emotional Learning Committee is identifying trainings needed for staff. They have conducted a needs assessment and are developing a multi-year plan that incorporates items mentioned above. And I left off, I don't know how I left this off, but I did, the Kindergarten Committee, which is working with all kindergarten teachers right now on investigating their program and the role of play-based learning in the outcome for learning outcomes for their students at their level. Other work that's taking place right now, and this is getting into some content-specific projects, more of the English language arts classroom instruction work that's in the process of updating their current curriculum. So the first thing we talked about, literacy within supportive learning environments, is the training and supports we give for all teachers in all content areas, both in English language arts and in disciplinary studies, like social studies, science, et cetera, family consumer sciences. But our English language arts classroom teachers, those instructors are in the process of updating their current curriculum that's aligned to Common Core state standards and informed by units of study to ensure alignments pre-K-12. We also have updated math expressions materials for K-5 educators with targeted coaching provided by academic services. We have K-12 music, physical education, and art teams have been provided time to review vertical alignment and standards and progressions in their area, along with pedagogical coaching. And finally, our secondary social studies and science staffs have formed leadership teams to review curricular recommendations for their area, coordinate and develop professional development opportunities in their area. Again, these are all driven through conversations with each committee. It is not a one-size-fits-all operation. This year also, we are in our second year phase of focusing on our hourly staff. This has not been an area of professional development that we have been strong in as a district, and we've identified that it's a need, especially so we have effective use of professional development and instructional planning days for this. This has taken time to develop because the same people who would normally lead the trainings, our certified staff, are actually involved in their own training at the time. So we're really trying to find ways to lead training for a group of people that at the same time they're off, the same people, the certified staff that might be leading some of them are involved in their own work. So we've had to try to patch that together and develop a system that's going to be supportive of our hourly staff. It's led to working, this has led to work, to us working differently, and you'll see some of the things in terms of safety and security has been an area of focus for them. Technology was a need, and trying to, we have on-demand technology and other technology trainings that we provide to staff, but we have many more that we'd like to continue to add. Focusing on budget and payroll training in terms of using our Business Plus software, and finally customer service. And you'll see some of the products of this as you walk in our hallways. You probably have noticed the signs that are up outside of doorways, just some little pieces that, to welcome people so that they know who's inside of those rooms. We have artwork up on the walls and creating a more inclusive environment. The indicators we look at to measure how the progress of our professional development program, and again, this is really difficult. It is difficult in one presentation to capture an entire professional development program for a district because it's that complex. But we do look at staff self-assessments pre and post trainings. We look at academic achievement of our students because if we're training our staff, we should see the impact on our academic achievement, and finally social and emotional data. And that ranges everywhere from the student engagement survey data that I share with you, attendance, elementary report cards, the DECA at the early learning level, ECHRS, co-curricular participation, immunizations, suspensions, etc. So this has been an overview from a district lens, but much work also the district work is, I wouldn't even say anywhere near even half of the professional development that takes place, because a lot of it takes place within school improvement planning at the building level. And so what you're going to hear from next is 5 different buildings, and I promise you one picture from each of their buildings, one slide, and we're going to walk through just the professional development from their perspective. And so we'll look at Prairie Ridge, then Locust Lane, Mans, North Star, and Memorial. So we'll start with Heidi White. Did I lose Heidi? Oh, there you are. She's right up. I was looking always back there. So Heidi White to start us off with the early learning. Sorry, Heidi. No problem. Shot right over the top.
Good evening, everybody. So at the early learning level, and not just Prairie Ridge, but at the entire early learning level, when we look at planning professional development, there's lots of data that goes into making those decisions. So looking at our data from year to year, we saw a growing number of children scoring in the need range for behavior concerns on our social emotional screener. That, coupled with large numbers of behavior incident reports, which we call BIRs, which are like elementary ODRs, which are office discipline referrals, but our kids don't come to the office. We try to deal with those in-house in the classroom. So we noticed that there were large numbers of behavior incident reports, especially for boys. And if you know anything about preschool, boys really struggle in preschool, and there's a lot of expulsions, out of child care centers, those types of things. So when we put these two things together, as we looked at our data over time, it really caused us to pause and reflect. So is this solely a child issue, or is this an adult issue as well? And are some of those behaviors triggering us as adults and possibly escalating those behaviors? So we wanted to try to work on our PD and how do we professionally work on the adults first and the children second in terms of behavior. As you know, many challenging behaviors are developmentally appropriate with this age because kids are growing, they're learning, and they're testing their boundaries with you. So a lot of those are developmentally appropriate, and children are not engaging in these behaviors just to bother you. So one of the big sayings we always say is, quit taking it personally. It has nothing to do with you, this behavior. And so we then began thinking about, okay, so how are we going to help staff with these behaviors, because we do support lots of challenging behaviors at the early learning level. So we began our journey with conscious discipline. And for those of you that don't know about conscious discipline helps adults see behavior as a call for help or a missing skill. So when you change your frame for those challenging behaviors, it changes how you respond and how you react to those kids. So conscious discipline, we like to think of as discipline through love and relationships within a connected school family so that all children feel included in a part of the group. And then we also talk about, we talk with a language of safety. So we don't judge behavior as good or bad. We talk about that behavior as being safe or unsafe. Okay, so that every child still feels innately they are good, but their behavior is just unsafe at this particular time. So our professional development focus has really totally been a deep dive into conscious discipline over the last couple of years. So in the 2017-2018 school year, we really worked on building those components of a school family and really making the classrooms feel inclusive and comfortable for all. We did a book study with the Conscious Discipline book, and we had professional development specifically on self-regulation and the 5 steps for helping kids regulate themselves. We also did professional development on consequences. People still have a mindset that a consequence needs to punish, and conscious discipline says no. Consequences are an opportunity to teach and an opportunity for children to learn from their mistakes. So we did PD on those 2 things. We also changed our behavior incident report form to reflect our new thinking. So instead of just documenting all those bad behaviors or that what we judged as bad behaviors, we began looking for what's the missing basic need. Is that child missing safety, or is their need safety? Is their need connection? Do they not feel connected to the people around them? Or do they need problem solving? Okay, those 3 things. And then once we figure out what that missing basic need is, what executive skills do we teach to help support them with learning that skill? So that was 2017-18. And then in 2018-19, this year, we're taking a really deep dive into the core pieces of conscious discipline, which are those 7 powers for conscious adults, 7 skills of discipline. And then for each one of those skills, there's a structure in the classroom to help kids and staff practice those skills, provide support. We've had professional development this fall on attunement, attachment, and joint attention. So those are 3 critical foundational skills so that children are able to, in the future, actually self-regulate. But if they're not attached, they're going to have a really difficult time. So the picture you see on here is one of our new curriculum practices. It's called Baby Doll Circle Time. It is the best thing since sliced bread. If you watch these kids, just makes me want to cry every time I watch them, and I just was in a classroom today watching. But that is really what we're trying to do for our 3-year-olds. It's a universal program for our 3-year-olds, so trying to get them using those dolls to build that eye contact, attunement, attachment, those types of things. So that's one piece of professional development from this year. Then it seems like regardless of what we're doing, we still have kids that don't respond to what we do, and we have some extremely challenging behaviors. So our professional development with our conscious discipline coach this year in January is going to be strategies to support those really challenging kids that aren't responding to what we're trying to do in the classroom. And then we also have our coach coming in, and she's going to be observing in our classrooms and providing feedback on our implementation of conscious discipline. So we're really excited about that. And then we are working through implementation rubrics to help us measure how we're doing with implementation and how we're growing in terms of our implementation with conscious discipline. And our ultimate goal is to become a conscious discipline model implementation site at Prairie Ridge first, and then hopefully seeing that grow to some community sites as well. So I can foresee this professional development around conscious discipline as something that's going to be ongoing over the next several years, because really it is transformational change. It's messy, it's hard, and it causes you to examine your beliefs and practices and then choose a different way. So that's PD for us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. Next is Laura Schlichting from Locust Lane.
Good evening. The professional development at Locust Lane has really been focusing on strengthening our universal curriculum and embedding those culturally responsive practices. And we did that as a leadership team by first kind of sitting back and really being reflective on the practices that we were doing. And although we found that there were a lot of really good things happening in a lot of different areas, it may not have been always consistent within a team or even across grade levels. So that's where we knew our work had to start. Last year, we looked at reading and really dug into our assessment process. Were we being consistent with how we were assessing kids? And then how did we use that information to really pinpoint what kids needed to address those deficits and move them forward? This year now we're doing that in writing and in math also. And so in building the capacity of our teams, we are really focusing on the collaboration skills that each team has and getting those assessments together on a more frequent basis, really pinpointing what is it telling us and practicing those skills. And that takes time and it takes training. And so that's what our professional development is really working on, building those teams to do the good work and to have our kids achieve the success that we know that they can. So, thank you.
Next is Heather Grant from Mans.
Good evening. This is nice that I get sandwiched in between the 5 principals. I'm right in the middle, so I can talk about what people said before me and hopefully maybe give you some guidance on what's going to happen next. But it's also, if it's okay, I want to go back here for a minute because we didn't see all these slides before, but as I saw Jim talking about this, this place with this model from our DPI is really where Mans is this year in that green part of that wheel. He talked about there's the will in culturally responsive practices and the fill, and we did that work the last couple years. This year, all of our work at Mans is really that skill piece of applying that knowledge. We got the knowledge of implicit bias. We talked about all the cultural pieces that are in that yellow and blue, and this year our job really at the building level is to apply that. So then the other piece that Jim talked about, which is it's really nice that this is fitting all together. Hopefully it shows you that the work that's done at the district level is also the work that's happening at the building level. So this work with the multi-level systems and supports talked about that whole foundation of having strong organizational structures, strong shared leadership, and our plan at Mans this year, our school improvement plan, is all focused on that in addition to collaboration. So now I'm going to make you all sick going really fast to get to my Mans slide. Okay, so our overarching focus with our school improvement plan this year is really strengthening our ability to function as a professional learning community. And people would say, we've been talking about collaboration for years in Eau Claire or at Mans. And yes, I would say that. However, what we learned is this quote here from Richard and Rebecca DeFore really was illustrating who we were as a school. That the fact that teachers collaborate will really do nothing to improve your school. The purpose of collaboration can only be accomplished if the professionals engaged in collaboration are focused on the right things. And so this year we're working very hard to learn what are the right things to be focused on during our collaboration. So our whole focus is on strengthening our professional learning community, learning how to collaborate together, regardless of whether it's about literacy or math or trauma-sensitive practices or family engagement. We're trying to do it all in the context of a strong professional learning community.
Next, Tim Schooley will share an example at North Star.
Good evening, everyone. At North Star, we started the year on Tuesday, August 28th, and we bought some books. You can see the book in the lower right-hand corner, What Great Teachers Do Differently. And it was just kind of a review of some things to start a year. Talked about the power of expectations, which is to believe in every single kid that they are there and they can learn at very high levels. Talked a little bit about 10 days out of 10. It's a really great job because it matters, and it's a really difficult job because it matters every single day. Talked about always keeping your relationships with students in very good repair. And then finally, there was a chapter about put yourself in their position, or kind of know your community, know your kids and where they came from. As the year continued, in the lower left-hand corner there, we racked up a little postage. We made it a goal to send a positive postcard home to the first and second families of every single kid. So we sent out 635 postcards so that kids got a good flavor that they belong and they're part of our school. Kind of the notion of before you lose it, while you're still undefeated, keep the positive spirit going to start the year. And then finally, a photo on the top there is just from our last PD day a week ago. And the final bullet there on the lower left, I've really enjoyed working with Paul Farmer, a coach that works with PLCs and principals. And when I've talked with him, he said, you know, I loved throwing a question out at my staff and just get them talking about instruction and moving all kids forward. So so far at North Star, you know, Jim said in his opening comments, adults just need a chance to connect with one another and talk about the work that they do. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, how do we make sure that kids, how do we check for understanding and make sure that they're with us at the end of every class period? How do we teach vocabulary to students, knowing that they come with very different levels of language? How do we engage all students, whether they're from a socioeconomic, cultural, academic, whatever background that they come to us from? And then finally, kind of the question of if you had a great job like mine and you got to walk from classroom to classroom at North Star looking at teachers teach, what do you think you see in the most effective classrooms and what makes them that way? So tried to make sure that we build relationships with our students right at the beginning of the school year, and then improving instruction so that every kid succeeds in our classrooms. Thank you.
Finally, Trevor Kolop will share an example from Memorial.
Good evening, everybody. So for Memorial, we focused on a few different things, but we started off the school year with the staff with a couple things here on student engagement, some student relationship building, because our student engagement surveys overall are pretty good. Our students feel comfortable at school, coming to school. They have a connection with adults, but sometimes it's like some of our lower percentages were on what I'm learning, how does it relate to the real world, how does it relate to what I'm going to do outside of high school. So I worked with some of the chairs and some things to try to make meaningful more connections with our students. And so the definitions on the left, I had the department chairs work on what is a student relationship, what does that define for you? So they worked on that, we kind of morphed it together, and then same thing with what is an academic relationship that you'd have with a student. And before the school year started, we had every student listed at Memorial High School in the Commons, and teachers were given the red and the blue dots to go around and put stickers on who they felt they had a personal connection with, a relationship with, and an academic one, and then to try to find some gaps and focus on some of the students that maybe didn't have one or two stickers. And as you can imagine, some of our freshmen had less stickers than our seniors, and are we missing, or who are some of our new students, to really try to connect. And so we left it up then for a few days after staff development during that week so teachers could look at their class rosters, try to take a look at some names, and then we'll bring it out sometime in January, February, see if we can add some stickers, and then do it at the end of the school year and see if we've made some gains and really meaningful connections more than, hi, how are you today? You know, how's your, you know, instead of, you know, how was the game last night, or, you know, how was work yesterday, or, you know, how's your mom feeling? And, you know, where students, you know, are you doing all right in social studies? I know you're doing great in my English class, but how's that going? So trying to focus on some of those. We also, and I took the idea from Dr. O'Reilly at the beginning of the school year, we took our entire staff, and it's interesting because you put the boundaries of the elementary schools, and the light purple, the green, and the yellow is Memorial's boundaries, and it's like 160 square miles or something like that. And so we took, Jim was nice enough to give us some buses, and we took our staff on the entire exterior boundaries to get our staff to realize how far students come, where they come from. If we have a snow day, it's because it might be because of this hill that students can't get in from. And so kind of again, where do our students come from? They come from different areas throughout our entire, square footage. And then over the summer, because I had a chance to look at the student engagement earlier than the staff, I started to just frame this, how do we really make connections? So the right-hand corner is something I tried to play off of our address of 2225 Key Street, is really being focused and intentional. Can we talk to 2 students and have really 2 conversations twice a day, 5 days a week, that are more intentional than just, hi, how you doing? And kind of, I put this in our weekly update, and kind of just give it to staff regularly to try to really focus on. They do a great job of talking and working with our students, but really, are we missing any students? Are there ones that we could really connect? And actually, I was sitting in the audience here and got an email from a parent that said, it's great that one of your teachers, it was a nice compliment that she's really got to know who my son is. He's done some really, really neat things, and then he's really taken off in that class because he asks her son about what sports he's in or what he did last weekend, or really kind of got to know him. So it was an interesting timing to this piece. So we've worked on that with the objective that, really student engagement would hopefully then move our students, academically in their areas. So that's a couple examples of what we're working on at Memorial.
And so finally, just to wrap things up, again, looking at the whole child and creating equitable access, opportunity, success for all of our students is the cornerstone of a multi-level system support, and hopefully you see that reflected in the professional development examples from both the district level and from the individual buildings. What questions do you have?
Questions or comments from board members or student reps? Yes, Commissioner Vu.
I want to start with the question while you are thinking. First of all, thank you for the presentations. My questions is, maybe you may be planning on presenting it at a different time, but the first question is, how do we know we are on target, and when we will hear more about that, particularly at the consumer level, the faculty and staff? I know you show us the lens through the district and the local building, but this is about professional development. It's meant to bring up the staff speed so that they can do their work to the level that it needs to help the students' academic achievement and emotional growth and all that. So the general question is, are we hitting the target? What are challenges we are encountering? And what reward or growth are coming out of professional development?
So it's a complex, professional development is not, like I said, one size fits all, and it's not done in one particular event. And so as you've heard from the 5 different principals, each of them at some point talked about feedback or data that they had collected to drive some of the decision making on their next steps, and likewise we do that at a district level as well. So we look at where are gaps and whether it's academic achievement, whether it's feedback we've gotten from our staff. We use all those, so there's a lot of decisions that are made for each individual professional development that takes place based on the data that we either pull in from academic achievement, or it's from social emotional data, or any of the other indicators that we mentioned earlier. I know that's a vague answer, but it's, you look at different measures and you make sure you try to match the professional development, just as the principals mentioned, based on what they're seeing from their staff. Yep.
Joe? So we were asked, board was inconsistently, I think, we're asked about the idea of where do we do more in regarding to where to best allocate our resource. And a question came up about how we might reduce professional development or power up. How do we find the answer to what to do more or what to do less if we don't have the detail? To the extent, are we hitting the target? And what's the barriers, if any? What are the growth? when do we get the answer to that to help us make that kind of decisions? And the bottom line is we are here to improve the quality of instruction, which the staff are the tool.
I guess following up on Commissioner Vu's question with that, at what point throughout the year do we generally solicit feedback from the staff?
It's ongoing, and as I mentioned, so I should have stolen Kay's slide from the opening of schools report, all those different committees. Every time you bring a committee together, every time a building principal has a leadership team, that's always the process. It's an iterative process, and you're constantly refining and reshaping your professional development based upon the feedback you're getting and the data that you receive.
Okay. Are with what you're talking about, Commissioner Vu, are you talking more maybe about a some sort of a survey that we would utilize as a district with our staff?
I am not sure.
Okay.
All I'm trying to get at is, do we need to do more or do less, or are we doing the right thing? And if it's not right, then what can we do differently? If it's right, then can we do more? Because the challenging question, the presenting concern is that we need to be able to reduce resource or up the resource that align with the strategic goal. And quality staff is one of them. Are we doing enough of improving the quality of staff? Are we doing it right? Because there has been talked about, just this morning, we talked about perhaps looking at staff development concern.
I hope, Commissioner View, I might be able to help a little bit in terms of like how do we know if it's working or not. At the building level, each of us have a school improvement plan, and we have indicators or like progress monitoring measures that we use to see if it's working or not. Like in my building, we use student engagement survey data, office discipline referral data, literacy achievement, math achievement. So even though our focus this year is on improving our collaboration, our hope is that that will increase student achievement, and we will measure that throughout the year with those different measures. And every one of us in our school has those in place. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, you did. And I want to follow up another quick question to that. How do we as board members follow up more with the progress that you just mentioned in the district level and perhaps at the district level? And then if we don't follow up, where do we hear the information?
Could you rephrase that one more time, because I thought.
You said, how would you as a board member to know how schools are doing?
Correct, at the district level.
Again, same thing that Heather talked about, we do as well. We look at the district data and we see that some buildings might be struggling on their forward exam, for example, in math. And so we had a situation like that a year ago where we realized that one building had, in one particular grade level, was struggling. And so we met with the principal. We set up an action plan to work with the principal and the teachers that were in that area. And we put together a plan. It's a coaching plan that we then implemented during the same year. So we likewise, we look at data as well. So we'll see gaps, we'll see areas of concern, and we will work with the principal to meet the needs wherever we see that there might be an issue.
Dr. Hardivet?
Maybe this will help too in terms of ECAE did a survey in the spring of last year, and they shared the results with us in Meet and Confer. And one of the things I think that came out of that survey was that when teachers talked about professional development, they indicated that they wanted more time to look at student data and collaborate around that student data. In other words, talk about their students. And then they wanted time to talk about strategies that would help them with the how of how to move students forward. And those were some of the things that I think have been, as you've listened to the principals, they've tried to incorporate that how piece into the professional development this year. You know, as we've talked about, the time that is provided through the collaboration time with the SIPs, through our instructional planning days on our calendar, and all through our professional development on our calendar days. We're trying to make the best use of that time to address those three needs from our teachers.
Thank you.
Commissioner Humble-Bohr.
A couple questions. Thank you for all of that and all the hard work that your presentations allow us as board members to understand. When you look at the more time to collaborate around student data and how, isn't that the premise of the PLC work within the district? So my question is, I know when you looked at the current work, I know that Heather mentioned PLCs, but where, if that's a vehicle to really do that specific piece, how are PLCs doing? And I didn't notice them in the current work.
Couldn't put everything in there, but yeah, but we have, so we do have coaches to help us work with PLCs with principals, and we're doing that with all of our secondary principals this year and with 8 of the more new elementary principals, if you will. So we continue to provide coaching for principals to help lead their buildings.
Thank you. Can I follow up with another question too? And then I had a question about the current work, and as we struggle through the budget and we start looking at the specifics with the budget, and knowing that we have increased alternative placements out and other enrollments out, are we looking at the pieces of the current work that would allow us to provide some of why we have alternative placements or current out, that we would keep those kids? When you really multiply those numbers, 500 plus out or alternative placements, and the cost of that, is the current work, I mean, are you kind of having those discussions too?
In terms of trying to keep more of our
Yes,
students in.
yes, exactly.
So, again, it was real broad, but we have a whole group right now that's looking at virtual schools and whether or not we can potentially gain some of our students on our continuum of services. One of the things that we don't have is that particular service for families to opt into. And so we're looking right now at that as an option for trying to attract and retain some people that might be leaving us.
Yeah, I love the listing of the relationship work. I mean, that's powerful and really has to come first before all the other stuff.
So the virtual work we're looking at speaking, which is making sure that we do that where we still maintain those relationships, so it's not just an online experience that involves a human being and a personal connection.
Are there any other questions or comments? I guess I'll join in the thanks to you and to the principals for sharing tonight. And it's a lot of work, clearly, and there's a lot that's not even included in the slides. I guess one area I don't expect information presented tonight, but in looking at our disproportionality data that we're still grappling with, particularly with Black and brown students, knowing kind of where specifically these areas are targeting that disparity. I know that a lot of these really universal strategies help in those areas. You know, when we look at the disproportionality in our Black students who are disciplined, for example, or have ODR referrals, things that are upstream like conscious discipline are going to help that. They're going to help move the needle on it. But, you know, being able to specifically for us as board members be able to articulate those things when we're out in the community, because it's something that people ask about and it's something that I think we care about, and I know that it's happening, and it'd be helpful maybe to have some sort of a written thing that just helps us connect those dots. I know they're there, just to be able to see that.
And it's a big backdrop to behind a lot of this. That's been a big driving force behind some of this work.
Yeah, and it's great work. So, any other board members, student reps have comments, questions? And it's, of course, it's a committee report, so it's open to the public to ask a question also. Okay, seeing nobody, we will move on, and thank you for that report. That takes us now to our final three items tonight, which are all the discussion and possible first reading of policy revisions. The first is a follow-up to recommendations during the board's work session on September 24th, and that is our policy 185 regarding board and district committees. So there was feedback received in the work session, and then we conferred with legal counsel, and we met this morning and approved policy revisions. So what I will do is I'll read through this policy, and if you'd like to stop and talk through it, just put your light on. But I'll read this entire policy because each section has some sort of change. Board committees overview. The school board generally operates as a committee of the whole, with provisions herein described for standing committees to conduct ongoing work for the school board, limited to those areas noted below, and for temporary committees of an ad hoc nature. As part of the school board regular meetings, generally on the first and third Monday of each month, the school board may review the work of standing and temporary committees and conduct work as a committee of the whole. While standing and temporary committees may make recommendations to the school board, all final decision-making authority rests with the school board. No official action may be taken by a committee except as provided in board policy and established procedures. A committee shall require a quorum consisting of a majority of its members to take any action. Any recommendation from a committee shall be acted on at a regular or special board meeting. The president of the school board shall appoint, subject to approval of the school board, standing committees, advisory committees, and other delegate/liaison assignments at a regular meeting of the school board. A comprehensive list of committee and delegate assignments shall be maintained by the school board president, and periodic reports shall be given to the full school board. Rules of order. Each standing committee shall use Robert's Rules of Order whenever appropriate, but shall retain order when deemed to be necessary to comply with applicable laws, regulations, or policies at their discretion. Each standing committee shall also take minutes of meetings, and a member shall be elected chairperson by each committee at the first meeting of each year after committees are appointed by the president. The opportunity for public input shall be made available at committee meetings in accordance with Policy 188. Each committee shall be assigned an executive team member to serve as a liaison and advise the committee. All committees shall comply with the open meetings law by providing notices of each meeting, posting the time and date, place, subject matter of any proposed meeting, and identifying any matter that will be considered at the contemplated closed meeting pursuant to 1984 2-3 Wisconsin statutes. Citizen member appointments to district committees. The president of the school board shall appoint citizen members to serve on district committees, subject to approval of the school board. District residents that are over the age of 18 shall have the opportunity to apply to serve on district committees, and generally may serve in a committee role for 2 consecutive 3-year terms upon board approval and/or reapproval. However, the board reserves the right to remove any citizen from any committee in its discretion if the board believes there is good cause to do so. All district committee appointments shall strive to be representative of the racial, ethnic demographics, and gender balance of the district. At their first meeting and as a condition of their committee membership, all new district committee members shall be required to sign a document affirming that they agree to abide by Policy 411, equal educational opportunities, and to adhere to all applicable board policies as a condition of continued service. Board members attending committee meetings. School board members may attend and participate in the discussion that occurs at any meeting of a standing committee following the guidelines of public comment outlined above and in Policy 188. However, only the appointed members of the committee shall have the authority to make motions and vote at the committee meetings. Board members who are attending a committee meeting of which they are not a member shall have the same right to participate and shall be governed by the same restrictions or limitations as members of the public who may attend committee meetings. If a board member is attending a committee meeting of which he or she is not a member and wishes to speak for a period surpassing 4 minutes on an agenda item, they must request in advance to the committee chair to be placed on the meeting agenda. The committee chair may approve or deny the request based on his or her sole discretion. Public notice of committee meetings. Notice of school board meetings, and it just reads that section. This part, under board standing committees, there's just one change there's two changes rather, under the Joint Commission on Shared Services. One is modifying governments to governmental bodies, and the other is to strike the commission shall meet quarterly. Under advisory committees, ex officio membership. For the purposes of this policy, ex officio members shall be permitted to speak at meetings to the same extent that all members are permitted to do so, but board members shall not serve as a voting member of the committee. Ex officio members have the responsibility of serving as a liaison between the board and committee, but shall not provide assurances or directives on behalf of the board unless given express permission by board action. And the final changes under ad hoc committees. First, under temporary committees, the school board and/or its standing committees may develop a temporary committee to investigate and report on a specific issue if doing so is warranted in the judgment of the committee. Temporary committees shall be appointed in the manner deemed necessary, and their duties shall be prescribed at the time of appointment. When the temporary committee completes its work, the temporary committee is automatically disbanded at the time the final report is accepted by the school board or the committee's work is completed. And then under equity committee, there is one change from shall to may regarding the committee membership, because and the rationale with that was not every equity committee necessarily needs all of those stakeholders. There could be rather large equity committees or rather small ones, depending on the issue at hand. So with that, I'd open it up if you have questions or comments. Yeah, Commissioner Humbuck.
I do. I just want to reflect for a little bit on maybe some other steps we would need to take as far as an experience I had as stepping down as a chair of a committee and having the committee totally change with new membership. So I just want to reflect on the idea that maybe we work on a policy or something that is more specific about transitions. So if a committee changes, what does that transition look like and what is the expectations of that transition, so that the work of the committee that has happened for a length of time is not, I don't know how to, that information is really taken into consideration. And you probably all know I'm kind of talking about the LEAP committee. I chaired that, or I was involved in that LEAP committee from the very beginning, and then chaired it until it got changed and this year, which is fine. But it was kind of like there was information and in a transition that really didn't take place. And I guess for me, and being part of a committee for 4 years and then just you're done and there was no continuity of transition, kind of, I think that should be there. Whether you use the information or whether the information changes or whatever. And I think with LEAP too, I just want to speak to the differences in the makeup of the committee. There were, so if the committee here is appointed by the president, there were things within that committee that we wanted levels of teachers and we wanted some representation. There was some specificity to the membership of the committee. Where did that go and where would that necessarily be taken into consideration? So nothing wrong here. I just want to reflect on that with the board to see whether we could make sure that didn't happen again.
I think it's a good question regarding the transition. I'm not sure I think that the transition between whether it's, I would almost consider it like an orientation. Whether you're a new board member or a new committee member, onboarding or offboarding, and I think that those are things that they're not reflected in a policy like this that determines the structure of a committee, but there is a piece in the handbook regarding the orientation of board members. So perhaps we could work on handbook language specific to board committees.
I think it would make it comfortable for everybody,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a good point. I'm not sure if it would go in the policy. I think it could go as a section right next to the board orientation piece in the handbook, committee orientation.
And then where would the committee membership structure go? Because at times they can't all be the same, Where does that go now?
Well, just speaking from the last few times that we have put it out there, when we have specific sectors we need to fill per board policy, we'll put it out for people to apply, and then ultimately, even though, I'll meet with Dr. Hardebeck and.
I used to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so usually though, of course, it's always brought to the full board to talk through it. In the case of I think, what we haven't had, the most recent time when we've appointed to a district committee with a lot of different stakeholders, not board members, was when we appointed to the Demographic Trends Committee, and that was last year. And when we did that, appointed, I believe, 10 new members or whatever it was, we actually had the committee help us with kind of ranking what they were looking for. And we let the committee kind of look at the applicants. And then the committee's recommendations were, from my recollection, taken pretty seriously by the leadership at the time and then the board. So I think that we go about it in that way too, that people have the chance to, and we haven't had that chance since that time. But for example, if the LEAP committee had vacancies, I think you'd talk through it as LEAP committee so that they're a part of the process. Right, right, and I know that we did that with the last time that we had it was with Demographic Trends, and they, ultimately, obviously, the president appoints subject to approval of the board, but it makes no sense to not have your other stakeholders weigh in on what they would like culturally with their committee. So yeah, I guess, do you feel like that should be reflected somewhere, or it's just wanting to make sure that that is going to still happen, or?
I just think it should feel more comfortable, and what that should look like. So there's nothing derogatory here by any means. I just think that the transition, given the people involved and then it totally changed, what should that look like? And how could that be made comfortable for everybody who's worked in the committee for a long time, and then passing that knowledge on to the people that are taking over, and be more specific about it would have helped me, I think. Because I really floundered. I didn't know how to help.
Yeah. Well, so then that's strictly just about the transition itself, and probably less of an issue with how we appoint to committees, because ultimately, the only change that's happened with LEAP is just the board members who represent on that committee.
Right, but.
And so just talking through how that transition works and making sure that history isn't lost, context isn't lost.
Or information, basically, yeah. Okay.
Well, and that is a particular, for the public to know, when the LEAP committee had a longtime executive team member who was the liaison to it, who retired. And so there's obviously history with that too, that, when you lose a person, and there's growing with that. So
handoffs are hard, I get that.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that we could have maybe some handbook language that would mirror the board orientation piece about the committee and passing on information. Because what we certainly don't want is for board members to be on the same committee for many years and not rotate, and that's been something that we've talked through, is that if we have board members who, for example, I know Commissioner Vu, I'll use him as an example, had wanted to be on the Policy and Governance Committee for years. And I remember, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I was VP and we were looking at the list names. And so now he's finally on the Policy and Governance Committee and stepped off the Budget Committee, but providing for those opportunities, because we want to have well-rounded board members who have that ability. So, yeah, I think it's a good point. Is there anything specific to this policy that people have questions about or come? Yes, Commissioner Beacon.
2 questions in the first paragraph, citizen member appointments. I'm wondering about the provision for the committee rule of 2 consecutive 3-year terms. Advantages or disadvantages for including that? Could we consider omitting? Thinking about committees where having even longer longer standing membership is a real strength.
We could, yeah, I mean, this was just written as a result of the last work session, and that came out as something that people seemed to want was some sort of a term. Now, what we could do is we could say, generally may serve in a committee role for 3-year terms, and then we could leave out the 2 consecutive. That leaves us the opportunity to say, you know, maybe we will keep them on for more than 2 3-year terms, but it also opens it up that maybe they'll just be on for 1 term. And ultimately, we want the language to leave it up to the school board. So if we left out, if we would say, and generally may serve in a committee role for 3-year terms upon board approval and or reapproval, and just take out the words 2 consecutive, would that, because then there's still the parameter of a term, which would hold them to the same standard that board members have ultimately, and which I believe, I know at the county level and city level, it's a 3-year term. But I actually, it's a good point, because I know that at the city level, I've been on a city committee for, I think, I'm about to get re-upped for 3rd, I think. So, I mean, I don't think that there's a limit as to how many terms. It's just, it's a 3-year duration. So, if we took out the 2 consecutive, would that be good with you?
I remember the previous discussion that you referred to.
Yeah.
And there's something that seems, overly restrictive to me now, seeing this final paragraph, that I would be in favor of what you just mentioned.
Okay. Is everyone else around the table okay with that? Just striking the words 2 consecutive, the rest of it will stay as is? Is that fine? Okay. Yes. Okay, so we'll make that change as a friendly amendment. Are there any other? You had one more, yes.
Was, in the paragraph about ex officio membership, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think if the policy language is what you see here, we're using the term in a way that's inconsistent with Robert's rules. And so I would want to think about using a different term for this kind of membership. And I guess my other question would be even more basic than that, but why would we want to limit board members' involvement in these kinds of committees? Why would we not want them to have the full, participation and rights of any other committee member?
I guess I can't speak to that necessarily. I think that they can participate in every way with the exception of voting. And I think that they can't vote because I'm not sure if in the charter agreements, does it specify with the board representative on the governance board, if they can or can't vote? Does it specify that?
We can check on that language for you.
Yeah.
I think maybe the practice has been that board members were not asked to vote, because in so voting, it might be perceived that you were speaking for the board, and as a board liaison to the committee, you're there to represent the board, but not necessarily speak for the board. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm not sure what would be the qualitative difference between a board member's participation in these particular committees versus other committees. So I would be honest in saying that I don't see why voting rights wouldn't be allowed.
I think it's just been a matter of practice, and perhaps sometimes not putting a board member in an awkward position of having to weigh in and have that recorded as a board member's vote, because just by the fact that board members are in the room, they have a different level of authority than other committee members. So it might be perceived as having maybe additional influence that other committee members might not have.
Would it be possible to pull up the contract, one of the contracts with either McKinley or Montessori right now, just to see if it We couldn't pull it up? Okay. So, this question regarding the non-voting piece, perhaps, I mean, I think the best thing would be to first check on the language dictating the Head Start, McKinley, and Montessori ones to see if we can have, if they can vote, or if it specifies in there that they can't vote. And then
It
if,
would also be the Education Foundation,
Yeah.
and I believe it specifies in the bylaws of the Education Foundation that ex officio members do not vote.
okay, so, yeah, so we just need to figure out with each of those what the parameters are, and in the ones where they cannot vote, outlining that, and then where the ones where it does not say that they can't vote, you could say board members may reserve the right to abstain on a matter in which they don't want to, whatever. But, so we could do that between now and the next meeting, though, figuring out some clarity regarding that, and then, so that's one piece of it, and then the other piece, which I think you're talking about, Commissioner Bika, is just the term itself, ex officio. Maybe we change it to something else. Okay, so we can check on that, and then, does it say non-voting? Okay, so we can do that later. We can get that information, and then maybe there could just be like a memo put in the Friday letter at one of the next couple Fridays, so we can get clarity, and then have a perhaps revised draft of this for approval at the next meeting on the 19th with those specific areas. Okay. Are there any other questions on this one or comments? Okay. So that will take us then to this next policy, 821.2, which was last passed in 1985, and it's being revised now. There are not actually many changes, even though it was passed in 1985. But these changes came from the District Communications Committee. So I'll just read these very briefly. News releases for this description refer to information generated by the school district and provided for the various media. News releases that explain/inform the public regarding district policies and practices or actions of the school board are given by the superintendent of schools or designee of the superintendent. General information about students and staff activities, about school performances and similar occurrences are normally given to the various media through the building principals or by someone designated by the building principals to release the information. When schools distribute unsolicited news releases, they should provide copies to all local news sources and the designated district communication contact. When individual news sources solicit information from the schools, i.e. when reporters are developing their own stories on specific issues, the information would not generally be shared with the other media. An individual reporter's pursuit of information is the property of the specific media representative. The school board has a practice of giving recognition to outstanding student and staff performance and honors. Information about student and staff achievement and awards will be provided to the superintendent's office by the building principal or the principal's designee. Are there any questions on that one? Okay, so we'll move that one forward. And then the last one is some changes to be updated on policy 674, which is about online solicitations, crowdfunding, and crowdsourcing. So some revisions have been recommended by administration to reflect some updates, some updated changes in practice, and some clarification. So I will just read into the record the few areas where there are updates. One is Section 4. To the extent an employee solicits any technology or software, the employee shall work with their principal to secure the prior electronic approval of the Director of Technology or Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. Number 5. To the extent an employee solicits any furniture or equipment, the employee shall work with their principal to secure the prior electronic approval of the purchasing manager and the executive director of business services. 6. To the extent an employee solicits any facility upgrades, the employee shall work with their principal to secure the prior electronic approval of the director of buildings and grounds and the executive director of administration. And I believe the main reason that for these changes is just a change in reallocating of the job roles, different of the positions. Okay. Are there any questions regarding those changes? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll put that on the next agenda on the 19th. And that takes us, I should ask, with any of these three policies, 185, 821.2, or 674, are there any comments from the public? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll move on to our final piece, which is a request for future agenda items. Are there any such requests? Okay. Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.